Morning, everyone. Happy International Women's Day 2025. Hannah here, your host for this morning's event. If you're just settling in and finding your YouTube links and getting your cup of tea, a cup of coffee, please do find the chat. Tell me who you are, where you are, and how you're feeling. I've just put in the chat, I am feeling quite springy. I've got a summer dress on. It's sunny outside. It's blue sky. It's green. Rich and I were just catching up about how miserable the winter's been. So I'm feeling positive and hopeful today. And I'm hopefully that's the vein that is going to follow us through. I can see a few people are joining in. Welcome, morning. I'm having a little bit of a technical problem. Please find the chat. Tell me who you are, where you are, how you're feeling on International Women's Day 2025. And I will get started shortly. Here we go. Thank you, Richard, for saving me as always. Okay, so today's event, Empowering the Women in School Leadership Pipeline. Some of you might have joined us back in October when we did a similar event all about the global majority experience and leadership pipeline in education. It made me think, why have I not done one of these for women? So today it is an event all about the experience of women in school leadership, aspiring leaders, existing leaders. We are talking middle leaders, senior leaders, executive leaders, governors, and trustees. So next slide, please, Rich. Our schedule, okay, I'm being joined by some brilliant women in our network, people we connect and collaborate with regularly, partner organisations. I'm going to say a little bit more about them later on, but each of them is going to have sort of 10 minutes to do a presentation about their work, about their community, their initiatives, their impact. I would love some comments and questions in the chat to then do a bit of a Q&A with them to find out a little bit more. And I'll do a big follow-up email after today's event, do some signposting. They are all on our Diverse Ed website. They all have a page in our directory. They're all doing brilliant work with colleagues. And I did add in Thea later in the week. She's joining us from the Philippines. So I've put myself on to do a bit of a mini masterclass before her on I'm Remarkable, just to enable her to put her own kids to bed before she joins us. So the event's running to 12:30 rather than 12 as previously communicated. So next slide, please, Richard. Morning, Claire P. Lovely to see you. I can see people are finding the chat. Our why are we here? Okay, yes, it's International Women's Day. Yes, it's March the 8th. There'll be a range of different reasons why we're here. If you can find the chat and tell me why are we here, why is it important for us to be celebrating International Women's Day? For me, it's important to keep having the conversation, because are we seeing the change that we desire and need within the sector? We started Women Ed 10 years ago, and I feel sometimes like we're still having the same conversation 10 years on. And with what's happening in the wider world right now and in society, I feel like we need this conversation more than ever. The DEI rollback in America that's influencing also Europe is problematic. Okay, and making sure that we are centering the female experience within other DEIB initiatives, I think it's really important as well. Welcome, Jane. Welcome. Great to have you here with us. So if you do want to share your whys in the chat, that would be fabulous. Morning, Ben. Great to have you here as well. He for she ally. And then the why really then guides us into thinking about the how, and the speakers are all going to share their how. What is it that they're doing, how they can support you, your school, your college, your trust, to think about some of the different initiatives and strategies that are kind of needed. And then the what is the desired and the impact. Oh, it's Jane from Hong Kong. Morning, Jane. Happy International Women's Day. Next slide, please, Rich. So the theme's always a bit problematic around International Women's Day, and it gets a bit confusing which theme we should be using. So there's a corporate theme that comes, I think it's from Essentia every year. This year's corporate theme is Accelerate for Action. They quite often go for alliteration. They often have a kind of a body gesture to do. But we need to remember that's the corporate one. And I think Accelerate Action is really important for us to think about how we can sustain the pace, create the pace, make sure that we are keeping our foot on the acceleration pedal. However, there's also the UN's theme. And actually, if we think about the UN's position in the world, the work they do around kind of women's rights through the SDGs, I think it's really important for us to perhaps foreground the UN's theme, and this year's UN theme, for all women and girls: rights, equality, and empowerment. Okay, so thinking about how those two themes resonate with you, thinking about which themes perhaps being used within your respective contexts. I think it's important to perhaps do a hybrid of both. it's almost ironic, isn't it, or contradictory, that we are perhaps leading with the corporate one, and who are the people who even get to decide the corporate one, and what's their agenda, what's their kind of their driver for perhaps doing the international women's work. I was in a board meeting yesterday where I'm a trustee in a local MAT, and we were talking about the gender pay gap. We're a small MAT, so we don't have to publish it, but I still ask the question. We still need to be looking at it. And we were talking about the kind of the flurry of posts and events that will be happening this week, but actually it's the work that happens 365 days a year that's really, really important. Thank you, Claire. You're here because you're passionate about female voices being heard as loudly as men's and having the same opportunities. That really resonates and speaks to one of my slides a little bit later on. Next slide, please, Rich. So just to read the SDGs, for those of you who are school-based, and then we have a mixture of people in the network, some of you might be like me, you've left a school or MAT role, you now work independently supporting schools. But for those of you who are school-based, I'd ask you to really think about how are the 17 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, being embedded within your school. SDG 5 is around gender equality around the world. So how are we speaking about that? How are we educating about that? And if your school is not working towards the UNICEF Rights Respecting Schools Award, please go away and have a look at it. It's a framework for you to think about how you really embed those 17 SDGs into your curriculum, into your assemblies, into your extracurricular, into your policies. And when you can demonstrate that commitment, those golden threads, you can work towards achieving bronze, silver, or gold, and you get network with schools around the world who are also foregrounding those SDGs. So please do go and Google it and have a look at it. Next slide, please. So when I arrange these events, as a coach, I always think about what are the questions we are inquisitive about, what we're curious about, what are our lines of inquiry. And I look back to the questions that we used back in October for the Global Majority event. And actually, some of them are quite similar, but I've tweaked them for today's focus and for today's audience. So thinking about representation, we know the data, and I'm sure Yamina's going to talk about the data a little bit later on from a women-ed kind of standpoint. Female-heavy sector, but we're not female-heavy when it comes to executive leadership. When we look at who are the chair of our trust boards, the chair of our governors, our CEOs, our executive head teachers, etc., we might have more women becoming deputy heads, heads of school, head teachers, but who is above them? When I got promoted to executive head, a lot of people said to me, oh, wow, like you're so empowered, like you're at the top of the tree. I wasn't. I had 4 men above me on 6-figure salaries. I think we need to really think about that, okay? Thinking about the fact that there's often invisible tiers above us. And that leads into the second question. Where do the glass and concrete ceilings lie in our sector? The glass ceiling historically has sort of been held across the deputy headship kind of space. A lot of women struggle to get into that headship role, and the data tells us they're more likely to become a head in the school where they're already serving and they're a known kind of entity. So I think we're quite familiar with that kind of concept. The concrete ceiling is the ceiling that sits above women of colour. So a glass ceiling we can see through, a concrete ceiling we can't see through. A concrete ceiling is reinforced and much harder to kind of penetrate or shatter. So being aware of that, whatever identity you hold, I think is really important as well. The glass cliff is another concept. A lot of women, and women in colour in particular, find themselves in roles that are quite precarious. A glass cliff kind of situation where we're almost being set up to fail. We're in a role in a school that's failing, a role in a school that's remote, a role in a school that perhaps doesn't have the support or the investment around it. So it then looks like that category of people can't lead, but actually it's the context that is specific. The fourth question Emma's going to kick off with in a minute, all thinking about sort of family-friendly cultures and life-friendly cultures and what that looks like and feels like for a range of different stakeholders. And then Lindsay's going to pick up the kind of effective working piece. How can we really commit to that to enable progression? You're going to hear from Thea about mentoring and coaching and sponsorship and the kind of the call to action for how we pass that baton on and support people. From all of our speakers, we're going to be listening to best practice and thinking about the impact. If we're not really focused on the KPIs and why we're doing things and how we're going to measure it, what impact are we actually trying to achieve? Thinking about peer support, a lot of you are here because you are in communities, you are in networks supporting those existing Inspiring Women leaders. How do we join up the dots and create that kind of web of support and do that signposting? I've already referenced, we've got some he for she allies on the call, thinking about where men come into the conversation around advocacy and support. And when you hear from Nell later on, she's going to specifically be thinking about the next generation. Okay, we've got things to talk about and think about for us. I say us quite widely, women who are in the sector, the adults in the sector, but think about that next generation of either aspiring teachers and or the girls stepping into the workplace. I think is also part of our work and part of that legacy. Next slide, please, Richard. I know you're trying to get Emma into the studio, but next slide, please. So thinking about the gaps for me is really important. There are so many gaps that we need to be aware of and mindful of. We have the gender pay gap, we have the confidence gap, we have the motherhood gap, we have the visibility gap, we have the flexible working gap. Okay, how we find those gaps, close those gaps, I think is kind of part of the drive, I guess, and being aware of them and how we educate and bring awareness and consciousness to others. Next slide, please, Rich. Sorry to make you do so much clicking here. And then thinking about the barriers, okay, what are the barriers that are holding women back? I read with interest every November the Lean In McKinsey report and Women in the Workplace, and they talk about the missing rung. The fact that men have these accelerated progress to get to leadership, they might bypass a step, they get support, they get the kind of the opportunities. Women have a slower progress, whether it's women taking the steps and men taking the escalator, or men having every rung on their ladder. I think being aware of that and looking for that and thinking about how we close that kind of gap is important. And we've talked about money a little bit already. I'm not on X anymore. I'm sure lots of you have also left X, but March the 8th always made me chuckle a little bit that when events sort of like tweet out what they're doing, here's our afternoon tea to celebrate all of our women in our trust. The gender pay bot just says, well, how come your gender pay gap is X%? Why is pay them the same amount of money rather than buying them tea and cake? Okay, so making sure we're really looking at and talking about those bigger questions, I think is important as well. Next slide, please, Rich. The reality, this is just some metaphors, okay, some visuals to bring to life those three sort of concepts. On the left, you've got the glass ceiling. In the middle, you've got the glass cliff. And on the right, you've got the concrete ceiling. And I think even being able to name those concepts is really important. When I'm doing DEIB training and I introduce perhaps governors or trustees or senior leaders to the concrete ceiling concept, they often haven't heard about it. And that's quite a fruitful conversation, bringing that awareness. So I think if we can all use that language around those concepts, it helps to perhaps move the conversation forward. Next slide, please, Richard. And for me, today is really about community and networking. For those of you who know me and have met me before, you know that I'm a big sort of like connector and people person. For me, relationships are what have really served me and sustained me in my career. Starting Women Ed 10 years ago led to me being involved with Lean In. My claim to fame is I have been to Sheryl Sandberg's house. I have had cocktails with her, and being part of that global network was absolutely phenomenal. As a result of Women Ed, I then started Diverse Ed. That might be why lots of you are here today. You're going to hear from Thea later about WISE. I'm just back from South Korea speaking at the WISE event. And then I've also set up two different communities and networks with colleagues, one in Bath, where I now live, the BAME Women Leadership Network. And I know some of you joined me at our conference in January. And as a result of my work in the UAE, I've also supported and co-founded WELN out in the UAE. So thinking about the networks we are part of, and if it doesn't exist, go and make it, is always my suggestion. If there's a gap, find people and create that space with others. Morning, Leicester, and morning, Luton. Great to have you in the house. Next slide, please, Richard. On the next few slides, I just want to talk you through some of the people who are very important to me that support me and kind of empower me. This slide is my team, okay? I've got a brilliant group of Diverse Ed associates. I find values-aligned people, kindred spirits, people who are committed to the work, and I love connecting and collaborating with them. So I'm sure you recognise lots of the faces on here. Behind the scenes, I've also got Sarah, my EA, and Blue, my brand designer. Blue's been with me since the start, 5 years now. Sarah joined me just over a year ago, and they very much helped me keep the plates in the spinning and the balls in the air. And then I've also got a business mentor, Val, and a coach, Michelle. Okay, so I feel really lucky to have this level of kind of support, and I'm constantly talking to empowered women. So thinking about who would be on your slide, who's in your circle, I think is something to perhaps reflect on. Next slide, please, Richard. Then we have our mentors. I did a post this morning on LinkedIn, and it really makes you think about how all the people you are regularly connecting with, collaborating with, but who are also supporting you. Who's saying your name in those rooms when you're not there? Who's opening the door? Who's cheerleading and championing you? On the left here, Jill Berry has been a massive cheerleader for me since the start of Women Ed, so 10 years now. She reads every newsletter. She constantly tweets out does post on LinkedIn about the work we're doing to amplify us. And I really am very grateful to all the support Jill gives me and the team. Karen in the middle. Some of you will know that Karen was my mentor for a very long time and a dear friend of mine. She passed away last year, and I really feel that kind of like that gap. But I always have Karen on my shoulder, like with her wise words, her gentle words, really still stay with me and guide me. And then the powerhouse that is Diana Osagie. If you've not met her, you need to meet her. Rocket up the backside is what I call Di. She is the person I ring when I'm in a crisis, and she always talks me down and gives me wise, sage advice. Next slide, please, Rich. Then there's the He for She allies, and I actually added some new people to this one this morning. Chris will probably be surprised I put him on here, and I tagged him in the post this morning. But I met Chris through like Teachmates and being an English teacher, and he was the one who sent me the application for a headship when I didn't feel I was quite ready for it. He was the deputy head in the school, and his head then retired, and he couldn't apply for the job. And he messaged me to say, I think you'd be great for it. And I applied for the job. I didn't get it, but it didn't really matter. It was the fact that someone kind of like saw that potential in me and believed in me and gave me that tap on the shoulder. So I really am sort of like further grateful to Chris. Patrick, many of you will know, he has been a supporter of mine ever since Women started. And I've supported him a lot as well on the work that he does as a He for She ally. Adrian's one of my team. I call him my brother from another mother. He has been a brilliant friend and supporter, but also gives it to me straight when I need it. And David Hermit is someone who I connected with because he was one of the only Black male CEOs in the country. As a result of that, he became one of our authors in our book, but actually became a chapter editor. Spent a lot of time with him, get on brilliantly with him. And I've spoken to him about 4 times this week because we're having a bit of a crisis in our trust, and I needed a sort of like kind of external perspective. And I really appreciate the support he gives me. So yes, today is International Women's Day, but it is an important thing for us to consider who our male allies are. Someone said to me yesterday, what about International Men's Day? It's November the 19th. It does exist if you need to celebrate it. So He for She allies, important part of the conversation. Richard, next slide, please. Role models. I always want you to think about who your role models are and how you are a role model for others. And I'll speak about this a little bit more when I get to the Unremarkable session. I think a lot about like, who have I got eyes on? Who am I observing? Who am I listening to? Who am I learning from? Who am I studying? When I'm coaching senior women who have got a particular challenge or problem, I ask them to find someone who does it, who embodies it, and just observe how they do it, and then we can talk about how to emulate it. So these are just some of my public figures who I look up to, and I just love that picture of the junior hidden figures, thinking about these young people who are looking up and really thinking about who they see in the structure, who do we see in the structure, and that kind of like that loop I think is really important as well. Next slide, please, Rich. And our solutions. So Claire talked about sort of like finding voices and amplifying voices. That's very sort of like resonant with me and what I believe and what I do. If we think today about solutions to problems, solutions to gaps, solutions to kind of barriers, these images are just about the work I'm involved in. And for me, it's about us finding our voices, using our voices, but empowering others to find and use their voice as well, that all voices matter. Then it's about how we amplify those voices. And that's really what I'm committed to through the website, through the blog, through the podcast, through the book, through the newsletter, and ultimately how we collectively change the narrative. Okay, so how we talk up, I guess, that experience of being a woman leader. Thank you, Richard. And solidarity for me comes with that, this idea of connectivity, community, and our networks. These 3 pictures really signify to me 3 important events that have happened to me in the last 6 months. So the first picture was the event from our event out in Dubai. We had 250 people there on a Saturday, the most amazing event, amazing group of women. The picture in the middle is from the event I organised here in Bath. I have really intentionally built a brilliant network in Bath in the last 18 months, and I curated a day of us all coming together. And then the picture on the right is from the event I spoke at in Seoul over February half term. It's so nice sometimes to just be a participant and a speaker rather than the organizer. I also had horrific flu, so I wasn't massively on form, but absolutely brilliant to meet women who are working in the Asian kind of part of the international school scene. So thinking about how we stand in solidarity with one another, how we build each other up, how we have each other's backs is also part of that wider conversation. Next slide, please, Rich. I'm going to be finished soon, Emma, I promise you. So today is all about us amplifying pioneers and change makers. They might not use those words to self-identify, but I see them. They are pioneering, they are making significant changes in the sector. So you're going to be hearing from Emma, myself, Jess, Lindsay. I'm not sure whether Lucy's joining us or not. They usually turn up in sort of half of their partnership. Nell, Thea, and Yamina. I can't wait for you to hear about the brilliant work that they are leading on and co-leading. On the next slide, I think we've just got some final logos because each of them has founded and co-created different spaces, different organisations. And I will send these links out to you. There's a page for each of them in our DEIB directory so that you can then share the work they're doing and amplify it with your own networks and with your own institutions.